bit in it. Yeah, a little bit, right? Here we go. Here we go. Hey, baby, what you know good? I'm just getting to do my food. Boys, when will it end? When will people start getting together again? Things will never get better. The news paper. What else is new, my friend? Besides what I read, can't find no work, can't find no job, my friend. Money is tighter than it's ever been. Woo! Hey man, I just don't understand what's going on across this land. Ah, what's happening, brother? Hey, what's happening? I want to know, I want to know. Things still get down where we used to go with things. Now more up when the minute. Do you think they have a check? And tell me, friend, how in the world have you been? Tell me what's out. I want to know what's in. Woo! What's the deal? What's the deal, man? What's happening? What's happening, brother? What's happening? What's happening, brother? Oh, I wanna know what's happening. What's happening, my man? Been gone a long, long time. Now I'm back on the scene. What's happening, brother? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening, brother? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening?
Good evening and welcome, or good afternoon. It's still the afternoon, and with Conrad. I'm your host, Reverend Conrad Tillard. And as always, we come to you not from the right, that narrow perspective, but nor do we come to you from the equally narrow perspective of a doctrinaire left winger. We come to you from an African American perspective, straight down the middle, common sense, rooted in the African American perspective. And so I'm very, very grateful that you've decided to join us today. We've got a very, very important show today. And I hope you will like, I hope you will share, and I hope you will tell people about this this program that is going to help to illuminate the minds of African Americans, to give us a different perspective. Unfortunately, we are not like other communities where there's a broad spectrum of ideological perspectives in the African American community. It's very, very simple. You turn on CNN, you get a left wing perspective. You turn on MSNBC, you get a left wing perspective. You turn on public television, you get a left wing perspective. Turn on NPR, you get a left wing perspective. Black talk is no longer Afrocentric on many of the Black stations around the country. It's simply left wing drivel. It's people repeating what progressives have been selling us since we embraced people like Cornel West, Michael Eric Dyson, and many of these Black professors that teach at these elite institutions. I love them and respect them, but they certainly are not cut from the same cloth as our traditional scholars. They're not cut from the cloth of Du Bois, John Hope Franklin. They're not cut from the cloth of the Black scholars who taught us, Booker T. Washington, Dr. Ben, Dr. John Henrik Clark, you name it. They are not Afrocentric as such. They are not even Black centric. They are progressive. It is the governing philosophy and ideology that opens up their thought process and their worldview. And in the last 35 years, since like 1994, when Wes was sort of presented to the African American community as this public intellectual, we have had a steady drivel of these progressive, postmodern ideas. And, you know, Stevie Wonder wrote a wonderful song several years ago called Superstition. And one of the very important lines in the song, he said, when you believe in things that you don't understand, you suffer. And so many of you who are out here pushing the Democrats, pushing these progressive ideas, you've never even heard of the word postmodernism. You never even, you pushing critical race theory, and you don't even understand the historical critical method. I'm telling you, stuff is being pushed on you that your grandmother and grandfather are rolling over in their graves that you have accepted. And so I want to, on this program, I want to give you an opportunity to hear a different voice. On this program, you're not going to hear a left wing drivel. I'm not carrying the ball for the left, but nor are you going to hear a right wing talking points. You're not going to hear people who are more conservative, who believe in the right wing, and are uncritical of it. There are a lot of things that I think the right wing says are important, and then there are some things that I think need to be critiqued. Same as the left. I don't think that the left is all bad. As I've said before, context is everything. I knew Stokely Carmichael. He was a great mentor and later friend of mine. He was a leftist, and I understand the role that leftism has played in American politics, in the Black community, in progressive circles, in the Caribbean and Africa. I get all of that. That has nothing to do with this place and time where Black people are in this country with historical opportunities, unprecedented opportunities. And the biggest thing standing in our way, as far as I'm concerned, is ourselves. Don't tell me about voter suppression, okay? Because the only voter suppression I see is Black folks in our communities not going out to vote when elections come. You had voter suppression last night in Dalton, Illinois. There's a very controversial mayor out there, Tiffany Henyard. And, we talk about voter suppression as though the Ku Klux Klan is sitting around threatening and intimidating Blacks, or there's some sheriff, Chief Lowry Pritchard, or there's some sheriff, Jim Clark, standing in the way of the Board of Registration office, or there's some corrupt register that's trying desperately to stop Blacks from voting. Come off of that. I mean, let's we do a historical disservice to our people. It's a bastardization and an ignoring of the real opposition that these courageous people faced. You don't face even a modicum of that to get your butt up and go register to vote. And I don't care if you're in Jackson, Mississippi, or Philadelphia, Mississippi, or Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You don't face any obstacle. The only thing stopping you from voting is apathy. And we need to be able to call these things. We can't get better if we're not realistic. But Tiffany Henyard brought, as I understand it, busloads of supporters to try to keep her office. And, as often happens in Black politics in these urban communities, she got outflanked. She thought her people were coming to uh, uh, um, a primary, and the elected official that was in charge of the process, he decided to do a caucus. Well, it takes a lot more organizing to do a caucus than it does just to cast a vote. So she was outflanked. Apparently, she got there late with her supporters. They had already stacked the deck. The deal was done. What I'm saying is that happens in urban politics. I've seen it for 40 years in Philadelphia and New York City, and it just happens. But I don't think that can be confused. That's just corrupt politics. That's just hardball, big city politics. But black people are not being disenfranchised. At least no one has presented any compelling uh, 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 proof or evidence to me that we are. But I want to start out the show today by saying that, you know, one of the things that we've done as a people, we've gotten away from scripture. And, I'm a very broad person, and I've had a very ecumenical and interfaith experience. And so I have a lot of friends who are practice other faiths, Muslims, Jews. Uh, I'm a Christian minister, and I know a lot of people in New York City and the Harlem context that practice. They're Coptic Christians, people who practice traditional African religions. I understand the complexity of the African American experience. So, you know, I would just say that all scripture has great value. And even for people that are not overly religious, the wisdom, the ancient wisdom of the scripture should be of great value to you, even if you're not particularly of faith. And I just want to raise, as we begin our program today, this wonderful text found in Proverbs 22:28. It's very simple, yet very profound. Do not move an ancient boundary stone set up by your ancestors. And I would say, Black people, when we move toward postmodernism, that's what we're doing. Let me play a clip for you. You know, listen, and I really mean this. I care about human beings. I care about all people. I'm not in any way a person that doesn't love all people. I'm striving my best to live according to the ethics of Christ, to see the value of all human beings. But I also know that as Black people, we've had some markers, some guidelines. Our ancestors left us a legacy. And when we get away from that legacy, when we ignore that legacy, when we act as though that legacy is not important, then I think we run into trouble. Now that scripture, for all of you theological purists, yes, it's the original context. They were talking about the stealing of land from widows and orphans, and we're not going to really deal with that today because even though that is the original context of that text, but it also uh, metaphorically and theologically suggests to us that when you move the ancient boundary stones, you forget the historical memory. You forget the values. There's no transference of the values. And yesterday, as the Supreme Court is uh, looking at perhaps one of the most important cases in the history of the Supreme Court. I think couldn't be any clearer why, when we get away from the ancient boundary stones, we get in trouble. I want to play a clip from CNN, and we'll come back and have some discussion about these issues.
The ultimate test for declaring the ultimate species.
Socialists, we are here to eat and dominate.
He's bottom heavy, he's pear-shaped, just like
This is head-to-head. One of the furriest. Unbelievable! Go!
Human versus Hamster, streaming exclusively on Max.
Let's bring in Tennessee Attorney General John Reddy, who is the respondent in this case, defending the state ban. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. So you were at the court today. What was your sense on how the justices heard Tennessee's argument? Do you agree with the observers who say that the majority seemed largely sympathetic to Tennessee's point of view?
Well, you never want to prognosticate, Jake, but certainly they were asking a lot of probing questions. This is the first constitutional case looking at gender identity issues. And I think the court recognizes that this will have a potentially significant precedential effect. So they were really pressing both sides. It was a long argument and they worked through quite a few issues.
Here's a basic question for you. So what do you say to the parents of a transgender minor who say, you are taking away the only thing that is keeping my kid telling himself or herself? That your ban, your imposition of your view is going to result in my kid taking his life. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, suicide is very huge concern, and there's been a lot of rhetoric around that. But today at the court, Chase Strangio, the ACLU's attorney, conceded that transition treatments for children do not change the rate of completed suicide. And so we hear a lot of rhetoric about how this is the only solution to kids killing themselves, which I think is very dangerous. Nobody wants kids to do that. But the actual scientific evidence of research into it shows that it really doesn't make a difference in the rate of suicide, whether a child is treated or not.
During arguments, the U.S. Solicitor General warned if the U.S. Tennessee's law, it will lead to a nationwide ban, because this will not just affect Tennessee, as you yourself have already acknowledged. Take a listen.
I think it's important to recognize that my friend's arguments would equally apply to a nationwide ban if this were enacted by Congress. And so I think that the court should keep that in mind when thinking about the level of scrutiny here.
Is that the goal here, or do you think that California should be able to do whatever California wants to do?
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of our federal system is we have 50 states. The people of each state govern themselves, and they're able to make their own decisions. Now, in Tennessee, we tend to think California is wrong about a lot of things, but they're free to be wrong. They're able to do that. I think a federal ban is a much different issue. There are other constitutional issues involved in that, limits on the federal power. This is all about the state's ability to make its decisions for itself.
The law, I have to say, I understand when people who oppose the law say, this is an anti-liberty move. You are taking away the ability of parents, healthcare provider, about the treatment that family wants. How do you respond to that?
Well, if you look at the systematic reviews of research, every one of them shows little to no benefit for kids from these procedures.
Who gets to determine that? You're not trying to ban, you're not trying to ban breast augmentation or breast reduction for that matter. You're only talking about this one issue.
Well, I mean, I think the state, when the legislature looked at this, they did an intense review of the research. They talked to experts, and each state gets to make its own evaluation when regulating the practice of medicine of how to balance risks and benefits and how to balance the trade-offs therein. And here, there is a real risk to kids. There are lifelong potential side effects: permanent loss of fertility, permanent loss of sexual function, tumors, blood clots, bone density disorders, cognitive impairment. So it's not as if you either let them do it or you don't, and that's the only choice. There are major downstream effects on kids, and that's what states have done for hundreds of years.
Do you think that's what this is? You don't think that there's a religious component to this? Is your faith or the faith of the legislators in Tennessee, is that part of this at all? Is that guiding them at all, or guiding you?
I mean, I can't speak to what drives each legislator to make their decisions, but you see the coalition involved in this, and there were a number of LGB groups involved. There were a number of medical groups involved in this. The decision was based on the research. And if you look at what's going on in Europe, those are countries that are very different than Tennessee or Texas or the various red states here. They have very different commitments, very different values, but they've reached the same result through an evidence-based approach.
But they're not banning it. It's the difference. I mean, they might be, it's the greatest thing in the world, but they're not saying you can't do it.
There are pretty severe restrictions on the availability of these procedures for kids. Some of them allow experimental procedures. Some have age limits that are under 18, but 16 years old. And in the red states, there are different variations on exactly what the prohibition is like. But the gist of it is
U.S. Supreme Court. Chase Strangio. Chase, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. So the case comes at a time when 26 states have passed stricter treatments for transgender youth, according to an analysis of data from the nonprofit think tank Movement Advancement Project. So how do you plan to argue before the U.S. Supreme Court that could have wide-ranging implications beyond the state of Tennessee?
Well, thank you for having me, Jake. And obviously, this is a critical inflection point for transgender people across the country. We're of an election season where transgender people played an outside role in people's consciousness in terms of the way in which we were situated as a threat to others. And when we look at the map of states that ban evidence-based healthcare, we went from 0 states that had these bans in 2020 to now more than half the country. So before the court tomorrow, the question is really a simple one as I see it. It's really, this is a law that bans medical treatment only when it is prescribed inconsistent with an individual's sex. Our argument is that that treats people differently because of their sex, and therefore the court has to treat it like all other forms of sex discrimination, and that's why it's unconstitutional.
So attorneys representing the state of Tennessee told the U.S. Supreme Court, quote, if the government's theory holds, men who identify as women could claim constitutionally based access to women's bathrooms, women's locker rooms, and women's sports. Accepting that theory would perversely erode women. I want to bring in the lawyer who's going to argue this high-profile case before the U.S. Supreme Court, Chase Strangio. Chase, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. So the case comes at a time when 26 states have passed laws restricting healthcare treatments for transgender youth, according to a CNN analysis of data from the nonprofit think tank Movement Advancement Project. So how do you plan to argue before the U.S. Supreme Court in a case that could have wide-ranging implications beyond the state of Tennessee?
Well, thank you for having me, Jake. And obviously, this is a critical inflection point for transgender people across the country. We're coming off of an election season where transgender people played an outside role in people's consciousness in terms of the way in which we were situated as
Okay, that was Chase Strangio. Chase Strangio is a transgender man, meaning born a biological woman and transitioned to become a biological, presenting as a male. Chase Strangio yesterday made history in becoming the first transgender attorney to argue before the Supreme Court. And before that, of course, you heard Jake Tapper. Chase Strangio would argue yesterday on some of the interviews that this transgender surgery, which is cleverly framed by the proponents of this as gender affirming. You see, framing is so important when you look at an issue. Now, if you say sex change surgery for minors, which is in fact what's taking place, the American people have a chance to look at this from a different perspective, and they will, generally speaking, say that is something that it should not happen. But if you say gender affirming care, gender affirming, see, one of the reasons why the Democrats lost is that the American people have simply grown tired of the emotionalism that Democrats use in describing every issue. Everything is an existential threat. Every issue revolves around hurt and pain and suffering. And the Democrats have used the emotional appeal to try to make the American people buy some of the very extreme ideas that they are selling. And so, in this very important case before the Supreme Court, where we as a society have been reduced to the point where we cannot easily understand that to allow a minor child to have a surgery that would forever change their physiology, remove their breast, inhibit their ability to go through puberty, remove their genitalia. And we can't even decide as a society that that's not something that we should be doing to children. That's where we are based upon the extreme agenda of the Democratic Party. And I don't know about you, but it makes one, a Democrat like me, have to say, I'm actually glad there's a conservative Supreme Court there. I'm actually glad that there are constitutionalists there that are going to look at this issue and say, no, there's no constitutional right to take a child, and this is not a sex discrimination issue, as they will cleverly argue. This is we regulate minors in many cases. Children 16 and under can't drive a car. In some states, it's 18. In New York, for many years, it was 18. I don't know what it is today. Children can't get tattoos. Children can't buy liquor, alcohol, can't even go in a liquor store. So our society, rather wisely, a 13-year-old girl that may absolutely adore a 20-year-old man cannot give consent to have sex. She can have it, but if she does, that man is violating the law, because the law says by statute, this girl is incapable of saying yes. Oh, one of the emotional appeals, one of the deceptive appeals is to try to say, are you going to tell parents that they can't work with their doctors and transition these children that are prepubescent? Well, we do that all the time. In fact, it's you, liberals and progressives, that told parents and tell parents every day, you can't spank your children. It's you, liberals and progressives, that tell parents that they have all kinds of limitations and restrictions. Naturalists that want to feed their children a certain way. The courts have prudently said, hey, wait a minute, they're your children, but if you got wrapped up in some crazy ideology and the child is 13 years old and weighs 10 pounds, we're going to come in society and say, hey, you can't do that to that child. That's their child. But the society that's healthy says, no. If you're abusing that child, if you can't make rational decisions about the well-being of that child, we have agencies in most cities and states that are concerned about child welfare. And I think a lot of times those agencies overreach. But certainly if you tell a parent they can't spank their child, and certainly if you tell parents that they have to have their child in school every day because we have compulsory education, you certainly should be able to tell a parent, no, you're not going to take a 4-year-old and have an irreparable surgery. You're not going to take a 4-year-old. And I would challenge this attorney. 2-year-olds don't know if they're male or female. They're not even thinking about that. And I think it's another indicator of how far afield we've gone to let these adults impose on our society and on the minds of children and posit to speak for children, promoting this very, very dangerous ideology. You can't move the ancient boundary stones. If someone wants to transition, let them get to be 18 years old. Give them some time. After all, it's liberal psychology that's taught us that children's brains don't fully form to 25 years old. So why not wait? Why not let the child grow up? And then if that child wants to transition as an adult, then that is their right. And so I'm saying to Black people, I'm saying to all people who are reasonable, people of faith, people of every, just decent folks, we got to push back on this stuff, and I'm telling you, that's one of the reasons why it's probably a good thing that Donald Trump won, because we've gotten to the point with Democrats where to even say the things I'm saying today could literally get you fired, could get you canceled, could get you drummed out of any institution to even question. And so this, to me, is a perfect example of how fundamentally we as African Americans have gotten away from the basic values of our ancestors. Can you imagine talking to your grandmother about taking one of these babies and putting them through a gender reassignment or sex change surgery? Can you imagine what your grandfather would have said? What your great grandfather was? And don't give me, oh, well, they were just ignorant people. They didn't know. Oh, they know more than you. It seems to me that you are the ignorant person. It seems to me that you are the person that has become captivated by a relatively new obsession in our society. Where did all these transgender children come from? I grew up in this country. I didn't meet a whole lot of them when I was growing up. I met some folks that pretty much may have known they were gay, or guys that were effeminate or whatever. But where did all these children all of a sudden come from that have this compelling need to change their gender? Where did they get the language from? Do you remember people talking about that in your elementary school? Do you remember people saying they had a compelling need to want to change their gender? Of course not. These children are being inundated with this information. They're being exposed to this. It's being pushed. And like any other social phenomenon, the more something's talked about, the more it becomes widespread among the population. This is wrong. It's wrong, in my view, morally. It's wrong ethically. And did you check out Jake Tapper? Jake Tapper is another one of these journalists that has zero credibility in my eyes. The old expression, shouldn't wear your expression on your sleeve, or the old expression that you got to be poker face. Well, as a journalist, to me, he has absolutely no credibility because he wears his bias all on his furrowed brow. I mean, he can't stand conservative people. He can't stand moderates. You can just see the contempt dripping off his face when he talks about Donald Trump, when he talks about this one or that one. And in that interview against that very articulate Solicitor General from Tennessee, he said, is this a religious issue? And you see, they have a fundamental bias, many of these progressives, against religion. But is it a religious issue to say that children can't drink until they get to be 21 or 18? Is it a religious issue to say that children can't have an irreversible tattoo? Is it a religious issue to say that a child can't give consent to have sex with an adult? Is that religious? Well, I would argue, yes, all of these are religious values. I mean, listen, I'm sorry, you may not like it. Those of you that are not religious, those of you that have no faith tradition or no conscious awareness of faith, but I would argue that thou shalt not kill is a religious principle. It's interesting how, we love the religious principles when they suit our purpose, but we want to forget that they are, in fact, religious principles. Yeah, thou shalt not steal or lie or bear false witness against your neighbor. These are religious principles, and they are historical antecedents in every faith going back to ancient Egypt. And all of those are the ethics, the morals that we get, the things that keep us on the right path, in my view, as a religious person. These are religious values. And while we live in a pluralistic society, and the Constitution very plainly says, Congress shall make no law with respect to religion. And we are not a Christian nation. We are a multicultural society where people of every religion, every race, every faith have the right to practice as they see fit. But we have increasingly, in the last 40 years, been moving to a place where every ideology is safe but religion. You can hang a rainbow flag in the school, but you can't hang a cross or a star and crescent or the Star of David. Very interesting. Secular religion is fine. See, you're not going to get this analysis from Cornell. You're not going to get this analysis from Joy Reid. That's why Black folks, you're being goaded and moved into a leftward direction, because there are no dissenting voices when Black thought is taking place. Black radio, Black television, it is all based on the flawed, progressive, and liberal notions that were first pushed by the public intellectuals on the college campuses, then embraced by the politicians, and then the last group to fall in line, because they're perhaps the most insecure, always want to be respected, always want to be trotted out to pray over the state legislature, the city council, always want to be on the list of 40 under 40, or always want to be in the mainstream. The last group to buy into this stuff were the religious leaders. And so you have religious leaders that have been trained at liberal seminaries that are pushing this, and they are literally turning their backs on the values. What would William Augustus Jones have said about transitioning children? What would Gardner Taylor have said? What would Wyatt Walker have said? What would Bishop Henry McNeil Turner? What would Fannie Lou Hamer have said? What would Mary McLeod Bethune had said of the children in her school if you had talked about taking a prepubescent child and having a permanent surgery? And so it is wrong. And I don't, it's not a comfortable place. I don't know what repercussions I'll face for taking this position, but I can, of good faith, watch a society and watch the Black community sit up and allow these things to go on, and we not raise our voices. And if others are afraid to stand up and say it's wrong, I don't care if society says it's right. I don't care if the parents say it's right. Sometimes parents are just wrong, and the society there are a lot of parents that if it were left up to them, they wouldn't get their lazy backsides up and get their children out to school. School is of no value to that parent, and they would not make sure that child goes to school anymore. And many of them don't make sure their children do homework. But society says we're going to put your butt in jail if you don't send these children to school, and that's probably right. Okay, there are some parents that want to beat their children and into a bloody pulp, and society says no, you can't do that. There's a difference between spanking and discipline and abuse. All right, and that should always be differentiated. But if you go too far, society says, you can't do that. So just because parents want to do this does not mean it's okay. Parent, if you want to transition, you cut your genitalia off, okay? You take these dangerous medicines, but you don't have the right simply because you are a parent to impose this on a child that will likely, at least could very well grow up and say, why did you do this to me? There was a very eloquent young lady at the Supreme Court yesterday who had transitioned in her childhood. The parents around her, she said it was something that was inculcated in her. And I guess she transitioned into a boy for a period of her life, had these painful surgeries. And now she's back as a girl, and she regrets what happened to her. And she's trying to lift up her voice and say, this is wrong. We should not be doing this. We can't do this to children. And so I'm saying to you, I don't think it's a right-wing position for the Supreme Court to say, first of all, there's no constitutional right to do this. If it's not enumerated in the Constitution, and you know good and damn well that the framers of the Constitution did not give anybody a right to have a sex reassignment surgery, especially for a child, then the states have to determine what this issue is. And unfortunately, there'll be some liberal states like California and regrettably New York that, just to prove how progressive they are or giving in to intolerant progressives, they will sanction the mutilation of children. The mutilation of children. Now, remember, we're not talking about what adults want to do. We're not talking about liberty. We're talking about denying rights. This is not about denying rights. This is not an equal protection case, and I'm sure the Supreme Court will find that. This is merely a case of protecting children. But the mere fact that we're at the Supreme Court, the mere fact that this movement has brought this case to the precipice that if the Supreme Court wasn't made up of conservatives, and I'm so disappointed in Ketanji Brown Jackson. Yesterday, I listened to the question she asked. And she's in an interracial relationship. Great. If that makes you happy, fine. I mean, it's of no interest to me whatsoever. But the mere fact that she would try to draw a correlation between denying children or protecting children from allowing the adults in their lives to give them an irreversible surgery. The mere fact that she tried to equate that with the Loving case, which denied at the time the laws were that people of different races, consenting adults, could not marry. And the fact that these kinds of intellectual gymnastics are taking place, this kind of fallacious logic. And again, Black people, you're just the stormtroopers for this progressive agenda. And it's so unfortunate that we have betrayed in all too many cases. And usually it's the usual suspects. Where'd Ketanji Brown go to school? Harvard. I'm telling you, it's the usual suspects that are promoting this. And now you got a whole range of copycats at the historically Black universities. They feel like if they don't embrace this, they'll never get to the next level, or that this is the cutting edge. But it's wrong. It's not simply wrong because I say it's wrong. I have no moral authority. I can't pronounce with any edict, but it's wrong because common sense says it. Let these children grow. Stop sexualizing these children. Why do these children need to have drag queens reading to them? What's going on in this society? Let's stop sexualizing children. How did we go in this country with the gay movement saying, what does it matter what two consenting adults do in their bedroom? How does that affect you? That was the operative question. And quite frankly, it was a compelling question. And I think the goodness of our society, the goodness of the American people, the fairness, the understanding that our society is a free society where people have the right to express themselves and live how they wanted to live. I think that question, more than anything else, probably moved the society to become much more tolerant of two consenting adults that decided that they want to love each other, they want to live together. Now, it doesn't mean people agree with that. It doesn't mean that that's the value of everyone. And just because you accept that another person has the right to live their life the way they want to, doesn't mean that's your value. But what it does mean, and it's a good thing, is that in our society, we generally err on the side of freedom. But you see, this is my problem with progressives. And this is my problem with postmodernism. And this is where you got to wake up, Black folks. You got to stop letting people cry you into approving of this stuff. Stop listening to these emotional appeals. You know, Jake Tapper tried to raise the issue of if you don't let these children get these surgeries, they're going to kill themselves. And all the evidence suggests that people who have gender dysphoria and are grappling with these issues, they are fragile mentally. There are a lot of things going on. And I can assure you that is an emotional appeal to make you sit there and say, well, we can't have the kids committing suicide. So, okay, let's cut their penis off. Let's cut their breast off. Let's do something to them that even if they grow up and say, you know what? I was just going through a phase. Or I don't even remember. How did this happen to me? You see, I'll leave you with this. One of the reasons why progressives say they don't believe in the death penalty, and it's one of the reasons why I have a problem with the death penalty. As far as I'm concerned, in principle, I don't have a problem with if someone murders someone, first-degree murder, contract killing, just wanton brutality and murder. In principle, I don't have a problem with society taking their life, okay? But the problem I have, and the reason why I have reservations about it, is our criminal justice system is flawed, and many innocent people have been convicted for crimes that they did not commit. But the reason why progressives fight against the death penalty is they say, what if exculpatory evidence emerges later? What if we find out, as happens in all too many cases, that this person was not guilty of that murder? You can't bring them back once you murder them. Well, I leave you saying that if that line of reason is sound, and it is, you know, it's a very compelling line of reasoning. It makes sense. Well, I mean, doesn't it make even more sense to say that as a nation, as a society, as a people, we should not let any child get a surgery that when they grow up and when they are able to make decisions for themselves, they might one day say to you, why did you do this to me, Mom? Why did you do this, Dad? Why didn't you think down the road? Why didn't you think for me? Why didn't you consider that, like all children, I may change? Why didn't you protect me like the parent that says to the child, you got to eat your vegetables when they want to eat ice cream and cake? Why didn't you protect me like the parent that says, I'm sorry, you can't go outside to play. That's what you want to do, but you got to do your homework. Why did you protect me like the parent that punished me when I was off the rails and I needed to be brought back. I needed discipline. I needed correction. Why didn't you do that for me? And I'm telling you, parents, I know you love your children. And I don't ever think, to me, the relationship with a parent and child is sacred. And I ordinarily would never want to be in the position of advocating against the rights and interest of a parent because I understand that sacred bond. But I also have grown in 60 years to understand that some people as parents are simply wrong. And the society, again, you can't have a conversation about abortion as merely a conversation about my body and my choice. There's also a baby in the womb, and that has to be a part of the conversation. And as much as I am a strong advocate for parents, if a parent is molesting a child or a parent is beating a child beyond basic discipline, if a parent is starving a child, as I've heard cases, people who buy into certain religious groups and they are feeding their children minimally. There was a case where there was a 13-year-old boy. He had the physiology of a 6-year-old. He was starving to death. In fact, sometimes they die. Well, society has to step in at that point and say, no, parents, your right to steward this child's life has to be curtailed because you are making a decision that is not in the best interest of your child. And I hope that, there used to be a time in America where there would be 100% uniformity, 100% agreement that you should not have these. I don't think a young lady can go get a BBL. I guess that's what it's called, right? I don't think you could do that before you're 18. I don't think that you can go get breast augmentation. I don't think you can. But even if you had, I known some young ladies that were very well endowed and had to have breast reduction. I don't know what age you can get that, but certainly the consequences are a lot less severe. Nose jobs. Jake Tapper foolishly, or I would say rather insidiously, tried to compare with an unchangeable, irreparable surgery that would ultimately not really change the gender of a person, because you really can't put a womb inside of a man, even one that transitions and presents and sees themselves as a woman. But what you can do are surgeries that give the appearance, that help that person live their life as the person that they choose to do. And I have my opinions about that, but legally, I would always support a person's right. The only thing I don't support is medical assisted suicide. Ethically, I draw the line at that. Okay, but if an adult wants to, as I've seen them, they look 1,000% crazy to me. But I've seen people with tattoos all over their face. I've seen people that have put piercings all in their face, and taken on all kinds of characters. And if that's what they want to do in a free society, what can we say? But if you want to live with that pain, if you want to live with all of the implications, people staring at you, if you choose to do that, hey, you're free to do it. But see, the adult, in closing, you would assume has at least a basic kind of understanding of the consequences. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. But a helpless child at 2 years old, this lawyer said children as young as 2 years old know they want to change their sex. And if you let them do it at 8 or 10, they've had to suffer. See, there's no child suffering because they haven't had a gender reassignment surgery or sex change surgery, the one you call gender affirming. That's an adult imposing their ideology on a child that's not even thinking about that. And I'm telling you, that's anecdotal, of course. Okay. I'm sure they'll find some 2-year-old, which I don't know how they can do, because as far as I'm concerned, I don't even remember 2-year-olds being able to talk. And I have 4 children. But my point is, they'll frame it, they'll make the argument any way they want. But when are we as a society going to say enough is enough? You've gone too far. And I'm sorry, Democrats, you don't get it. But this is why a lot of people either voted for Trump or when they found out he won, they said, whew, they breathed a sigh of relief. You may not like Clarence Thomas, and you may not like the conservative Supreme Court, but you tell me that on a case like this, you don't feel better knowing that people who lean toward the right are hearing the facts in this case and will ultimately be charged with making the decision. And I think the biggest problem with that is that Democrats, you've abandoned common sense. You've gone to the extreme. You've forced people to say, I'm glad that you lost, because what you intend to do to society, we won't easily be able to survive. These are my opinions, my thoughts. Maybe I'll be pilloried. Maybe I will be brought into court and strung up. I don't know. Whatever the consequences are, I just can't sit by and watch what's going on in America, and at least not put my views on record. And so I pray for all of you families that are dealing with this and individuals that are dealing with this. But I think there's a better way than subjecting children to this surgery. I thank you for listening today, and we'll be back again. Always another topic, always another issue. Tell a relative, tell a friend. Conversations with Conrad, a different perspective, which is sorely needed in Black America today.